Hello, my friends. Took a minute to get on here. I was up early this morning on a crazy deadline, so I'm a little bit frazzled at the moment, but getting it going. I'll get John on in a second. Oof. How's everybody doing? Yo, the Discord is going crazy. There's I guess a few other Discords that have started to funnel into ours, and it's there's been a bunch of songwriters and producers and musicians and artists that have joined the Discord. So it's been cool to see that thing grow. We're trying to figure out how to expand the community, which is a really amazing place. So I encourage you guys to check it out. I'm gonna grab John right now.
Oh, you're in a new spot.
New year, new spot.
You look angelic.
I have I have a new chair in my studio area, and it's the most comfortable chair I've ever sat in. So I'm going to take advantage of the live from the chair this year.
Your hair's looking shaggy. You got plants going on. It's all happening.
I have no Wi-Fi, so hoping that the internet works out on my cellular, but I have no Wi-Fi.
That's crazy. Yeah,
for 2
it
days
definitely
now.
feels it's a little choppy, but I think it'll be all right. Hopefully it'll settle in. Why is the Wi-Fi down?
No idea, but it's not getting fixed for some reason.
A little bit there. Yeah, I feel like that's wasn't there was like an iLock outage last week. When internet goes out, it really can affect us record makers.
Yeah, I got a few plugins that are registered online only, and I can't bounce final mixes. I have a whole album worth of notes that I just did with the engineer in the room yesterday. I can't bounce them.
So what is the solution to that?
So
there's everything in all of businesses and tech is changing, and people are trying to move to subscription models and cloud-based blah blah blah. Is it the case that we should all be not doing online authorizations, and we should have everything authorized to a computer or authorized to a physical iLock? What's the...
Yeah, I think so. I think there's just a couple that that's not possible. One that you have to request for the online for the offline, and I just never did. I would say yes. This is making me think that all online only plugins should be abandoned in these. Now, thankfully, I don't have any. It's not a crazy deadline. But if so, I'd have to go to a homie's studio with a VT5 and pull up and hope that the sessions are compatible and go bounce them. But no one's killing me today for it not happening.
Well, it's funny. So, why I only use UAD. I don't use UAD for exactly.
We both don't. Yeah, Mike and I don't use UAD for next. I was able to do notes yesterday, but I couldn't bounce them because of some things. But it's totally fine, and it is what it is. It's just annoying, and the Australian Open of tennis is on right now, and in my breaks I was planning on watching the Australian Open, and I can't do that because I don't have Wi-Fi. So it's the little things that are coming into play here right now.
You and I talk so much about workflow and the importance of it because once you learn kind of the skills of how to make records, it's obviously an endless journey to continue to try to improve and get better and challenge yourself. But the more I do this, the more I realize how important workflow is. And just like, I have an idea, I want it to happen. And things like, when people ask us what's the most important piece of gear, we always say computer, because if your computer doesn't work, if it's slow or if it's intermittent or something like that, it just destroys everything. Things like headphones set up sounding good. All of a sudden somebody gets on the mic and they're ready to go and then something's weird and there's a delay. Like all of those sorts of workflow things are so important. And thinking about plugins, it's why I don't use UAD. It's why I don't do cloud authorization. I'm sure the UAD stuff sounds really good, but and I know they've changed some things now where you don't need the hardware, but for a long time it was like you have to have a piece of hardware connected. It's like, I'm on a plane, I'm on a train, I'm in an Uber, I want to cut a vocal or chop something up, or I don't want to deal with any of that sort of stuff. It's crazy. The chat's going nuts. By the way,
I know. Well, someone said hotspot. I tried the hotspot. It's not working, and I have Verizon, and it should work, and it's not working.
There's all these little extra things that like you got to take 2 extra steps to make something work. It just becomes so cumbersome for the creative process, because so much of the creative process is, oh my God, a moment is happening. Let's capture it. It's like a lot of walking and then
sprinting.
Also
on companies, but on companies like Spectrum, for example. My old ass building here I can only get Spectrum, which is really annoying. It's down the street in the new high rise is being built in my neighborhood.
Google building, like, right around the corner from you?
Right, it's literally
all be available.
Exactly. So for some reason, I can't get great internet here. I have fine internet when it's working. It's more than enough to do uploads and whatever. It's not a big deal. But companies like Spectrum should not have outages for a day plus. It's gone out for an hour here and there. It's just, this is uncalled for. I don't understand how they're going to even make a living by having outages all the time. And then when you try to chat and find out when it's going to come back, they're like, are you experiencing an outage? Yes. We are aware of this. We are working on it. Okay, do I have an ETA? No, I can't even give someone an ETA. Anyway, I got to go do some Atmos mixing today, so I'm going to leave the studio after this and go to another studio with Wi-Fi. And I'm going to get work done today, and I'm going to be productive as hell.
Professional to be like, I know I said I'd get you something today, but I don't have the internet. It's like such a, just like, I'm sorry, the head of the record label. I don't have the internet because it's 1991 where I am, and maybe I can die. I have an old AOL CD. Maybe I can get something to happen, but I can't upload. I can't authorize my plugin. It's just like so off.
Yeah, I think in more dire circumstances, I would figure it out, but I don't really have to deal with it right now. Anyway, I'm sure we have more productive things to discuss than the outages and Spectrum's incompetence.
People were chatting all over the Discord when the iLock stuff went out, and it was like, man, people got to find a solution, because all of a sudden you see that, the Discord is a great little community, ever expanding community. And all of a sudden you see 15 people going, I can't do my work right now because iLock has an outage, something. And it's like, wow, this really does. This is an important topic as much as it is kind of, we're just complaining about the internet. It's still like, that's a big part of how this stuff works.
Totally.
How are you doing? I haven't seen you in a few weeks. How are things?
I know. I'm good. Got back from a wonderful trip to London for just shy of 2 weeks, and ate really well and relaxed, and it was super romantic time. It was raining. We were just walking and with umbrellas, and it was just so beautiful. I love that city so much. I know you spent a lot of time there. I've been a few times, but I don't spend that much time there, and I miss it. I miss it every morning. I wake up wishing I was there. The food there are just the cultural diversity like we have here and like we have in New York. It just seems a little different there, where there seems to be a little bit more heart and soul going into the food. And, at like very fair price points for what we were going for. It was a beautiful experience. I mean, everyone knows that I love food, and just made like the best kebab I've ever had in my life. That's kind of like, and Indian food obviously is known over there. Things that I can't even compare to versions of in America, and I don't want to. I don't want to say anything except for it was some of the best food I've ever had, and one of the greater holiday experiences.
I mean, you know how much I loved London before the pandemic. I was probably out there a third of the year, 4 months ish in total. Spent a lot of time out there. Obviously, a lot of amazing record makers. People who watch these. There's a great community of London and UK and Ireland and that part of the world. Yeah, man, I really like London. I don't really like London this time of year, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I don't know. I had no problems. Like we would get 1 hour of sunlight, if that, sometimes 15 minutes. And I loved it. I have no issues with it. I was still inspired to go do things and go to museums and it was still great. So I'm back and I'm hungry. I'm back at work and I'm stoked. 3-week vacation is a little bit long for my break. In the creative juices, I think like 2 weeks is probably max. 3 felt just a little bit too long because of jet lag. I had 3 mixes done before noon the day I got back. I was so pumped to jump in and work. So I think I woke up at 5. You know, we went for a long walk, and then I just mixed 3 songs.
That sounds great, man. Yeah, it's been raining here, so you haven't really missed much sun. Although it's out today.
Totally. I think I think we finished. We're back to normal California weather.
Based on your travels, I know you've talked at various points of trying to do some version of what I've been doing. Although I think I'm going to be in LA for a little right now. About trying to mix remotely and maybe spend more time elsewhere. Has this trip opened that up in your head more? Are you going to try to go to London for a couple months and mix? What do you?
Yeah. So I had a couple of thoughts on that. I think my girlfriend would love this to come to fruition for that reason of just like, well, her best friend lives in London, her childhood best friend, and we had a great time with her and her husband. There's a baby on the way, and it'd be nice to go like when the baby's born and spend, you know, a month or so there. I brought my laptop, I brought my entire setup, and I was hoping for a project to come that would make me want to do it. A couple of things are like borderline. I'm not quite sure I want to say yes to this on a holiday. But one song, which happens to be I think it's number 6 or 7 in the world right now, this Ray record, which was crazy. It went number 1 in the UK while I was there. I had no idea anybody was listening to this record because when I mixed the album, I don't know, that was like my least favorite, to be honest, on the album. There's so much more interesting music on her project. She's phenomenal, and the depth of work and artistry that her and Mike Sabbath have done on this record is just, everyone should be excited for it to come out, because if they like this song, I just think there's crazy records on it. And then he reached out about them wanting to do an alt version of it just to keep pushing like content while it was almost going number 1. And I was like, yeah, like I got my headphones, I got my laptop, like I'll just do it in the hotel. And then it wound up like she actually wanted to spend more time on the production. So it didn't work out, but I was stoked. I was like, this is a perfect opportunity to try a record from headphones in a hotel room. So a song I already know, artist and producer relationships that I'm like 15 songs deep with. It seemed an ideal. It didn't actually happen. But I was excited about it and I felt confident. And then like my manager, who's from the UK, he was like, well, we could just get you a studio. Like I'm like, oh, okay. So I feel like in London, if we were to go do this in the springtime or early summer, which I think is the conversation, I have access to studios probably anyway. The time difference is what trips me out. But Mike and I were talking, like if he were to send a song late night, by the time I would mix it, he'd be awake to listen to it because of the time difference. So as long as it's not a same day theoretical turnaround, I think it would work out. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to consider it. I would love to. I love London. I want to do at least a month there.
As someone who's done all versions of this, I mean, I was up early this morning, so I can get a revision. I just sent off a revision that's we'll get into this next discussion in a minute, because a bunch of people were asking about this. Like I delivered a mix in Ableton. I always mix in Pro Tools, but now I'm doing this second song, same team, same people. We've got Dale mastering on Wednesday for a morning delivery in the UK Thursday, and we're still doing production stuff and mixing stuff at the same time. And so I woke up early this morning, got the stems, did a thing, sent it off, going to stream with you, going to get back and do notes, then do a session, and I'll have the night to finish it. It's like, you get used to the time difference, and you can do the math. And I've done it the same way being in London, working on records for people in LA. It gets extra crazy when you do stuff for like an Indonesian artist or a Korean artist, and you're like, wait, what's the math on that? Like,
totally.
When's the delivery of what date? And Australia's like 3 days later, or back in time, or I don't know what's going on. You just get used to it. That's pretty easy.
But the answer is yes. I'd like to do that this year. I'd like to challenge myself to do a month. It sounds like an ideal scenario. So springtime in London is a possibility.
That sounds great. That's probably
maybe April, May,
I'll be out there too. So let's go hang out. Yeah, I think so. I mean,
for real?
Again, I spend so much time out there and work with so many artists out there that I'm in LA when it's super cold in London. It's nice in LA, and then once spring has sprung, I'll try to head out there and spend a little time out there.
I also hope, honestly, I'm meeting up with Nathaniel, my manager, after this for lunch to have a catch up, because he just got back from the UK 2 days ago, and like I hope this Ray hit in the UK turns into more UK work. I love UK artists, and I would love to have an excuse to go over there, and maybe someone wants me to mix in the studio with them there too. And there's an excuse to go, and it becomes like a business trip as well as a, you know, some sort of social occasion. So I hope that happens more.
Yeah,
I love that city so much.
Time and
it's very inspiring. Like,
congrats on the song. The song sounds great. And you know, there's been a lot of
thank you.
Those that follow the more kind of like artist, producer, writer side of the world. Ray is someone who's been around a long time and had the major label deal, and very famously was and very openly talking about how she didn't feel like she was able to make the music she wanted or release things. She had hits as a feature artist and in collabs with people, and very publicly was like, the record label will not let me put out music. They keep insisting it needs to be XYZ, you know. And again, label versus artist is like a big part of the history of the music industry and the tension of business relationships and art and commerce. So not even necessarily give an opinion on that. I worked with her once or twice, and she was great, amazing talent. But to see her part ways with the label and then have an independent thing, and then I think have the biggest song of her career is really nice to see. And I'm so glad that you mixed it. I didn't know that either, because I listened to this. I was like, oh, it's cool. Ray got the thing. And Mike Sabbath is a great
nobody know. I don't even.
All of a sudden you're posting about it. I'm like, you mixed this? And he's like, yeah, I didn't know that. That's great. It's just great to see.
No, but I'm not credited anywhere. That's another thing. Like none of my closest homies
so
knew. How's a mixer supposed to get work if the only way to get work is for people to know you did something? And the people that you want to know, or you would think would know by default, because literally we talk every week or every other day. Like, I talk to certain producer friends of mine almost every day, and they didn't know because I didn't tell them, because I wasn't that excited. I love the project. That one song is the only one that I'm like,
so why?
I don't know. I wasn't sure.
This happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. When artists are independent, there isn't the same infrastructure of they call it the label copy for people that don't know. The label copy means here's the list of credits that will be printed. Oftentimes that's put into the deal as well. Like if you're a mixer, if you're a producer, whatever, here is how the credit is legally going to read. You're in addition to, here's the fees and here's the recoup and here's the royalty, and the credit is usually written into the contract. But if artists are independent, oftentimes they don't have the same set of procedures of, here's how it's going to be released. Everything will be credited on DSPs. It'll be credited these other places. I assume that's a version of what happened here. Tell me about the crediting.
It's all credited proper. Yeah, it's all credited properly. We checked with her team, and her manager's been incredible the whole time. Very communicative and upfront, and it was handled properly, and it's just not on Tidal, and it's not on. It wasn't even on these companies, Jaxsta and Muso AI that everybody's posting. I just posted mine because I have an absurd amount of streams that I had no idea. Like, this company is collecting data for people like us. This is incredible. Like, I just gave them a little shout out because I guess I'm supposed to post these things. I have 26 billion streams. That to me is obnoxious that I get to do this for a living, and that amount of streams has happened on work that I've touched. Is like, that is the gift of what we do. Able to survive off of it, and then like ears and hearts being affected by this. So the only way to do more of that is for people to recognize this. And even they've been so good, they didn't even know. So I'm not even credited under their platform for this song, and it's the number 6 song globally. So I don't know how to do it. I think Spotify and Apple, someone just said, should credit the engineer. I don't know why they don't. It makes no sense that Tidal would and they wouldn't. Apple has always credited on iTunes. They had they would have the README file when you would get the record. So historically, Apple has always credited the engineer and the songwriters and everybody. For some reason, that's not the case on Apple Music.
But you're not listed in the credits on Genius or Tidal, the couple of places that all the engineers. So someplace between Ray or the independent label, or however they're putting out, someplace between that team and the crediting just didn't get submitted or something.
Yes. Yeah, they said it did, but maybe it didn't. But even up until 2 years ago, or even less, maybe last year, my credits for Summer Walker didn't come up. No one had any idea I mixed Girls Need Love, and that was a hit record. Like, this has kind of been my story, and I have this kind of laissez-faire attitude about it up until this point of saying, like, whatever, like, I'm getting hired, it is what it is. And then I'm like, but am I getting hired as much as I would if people knew that I did these records? So basically, my point that we should come back around to is to say that I want to do some sort of experiment where, like, I overtly post about, which I don't normally do, about these hit songs that are out, or these successful records, whatever you can quantify as a hit, in many different ways at this point, and see if it translates to getting hired because I'm posting on Instagram. And if it doesn't correlate to more hirings, I'm going to delete Instagram, because it's the only reason I have it is to post about work so people know what I and my homies are jumping on. Other than that, I really don't see much more benefit of it at this point.
Well,
so,
that'll be a hard experiment to run, because who knows why you're getting hired and called. I think the reality, the thing for a lot of people is people are always like, let's see how to say it, like, basically everybody at every level doesn't get credited enough. It's sort of the same thing with, like, you're always going to do, the people that are most successful are always doing more than the job they're hired for. Doesn't mean you shouldn't fight for this stuff, but it's important for people to understand that, like, as you see, when John has a song he mixed, it's the #1 record in the UK, and he's not credited for it, and trying to figure out why, we have the benefit of lawyers and managers and things like that. And whenever I'm not credited for something, I hit up my people and say, hey, I'm not credited. Go make this happen, because
right away
it's all of us to say, hey, this song has 100 million streams and my name's not on it, and I did that shit. Like, it's important, but a lot of the, most people who are watching these things are coming up and don't have that business infrastructure. And I don't know, that's really, I think, what we use them for. I assume you've talked to your manager and they're like, what are we doing? What are we doing, you guys?
Yeah, of course.
That's both wonderful and a little bit frustrating. So I wanted to get into this discussion because I got lots of DMs about it. I posted a couple days ago about this song that I produced and mixed, and it was the first song I've ever delivered the mix out of an Ableton session instead of Pro Tools. I've always used Pro Tools to mix everything, and I was using Pro Tools to produce up until a few years ago when I switched over to Ableton. Because it's just, maybe we can get into that, but the Ableton versus Pro Tools, we won't really touch Logic because it's sort of the middle ground and I don't use it. But can you at least initially start it off, talk about why Pro Tools is Pro Tools the standard, other than it's been around forever? What does it do that's so great? When you were you producing in Pro Tools as well?
Yeah, I transferred over to Ableton towards the end of the producing, but only specifically for quote unquote beat making, or the beat making part of my production style, where I would just do some random shit with Simplar and then put it into Pro Tools and record guitars or live instruments on top of it. But the impetus to the record would start with a sample based thing, or in Ableton, because there's so much freestyle in there that the ability to just click on a parameter and it just be automatable. I have workarounds for that in Pro Tools. Because if you,
why do you mix
I just have been doing it for so long. So, I think the comment about being the standard is probably the first answer to that. It's just been the standard. I learned in it. It replicates a console. So when you're coming from that, my generation, which we had learned, you being one of them, had learned how to record and mix on a console. The closest thing gain stage wise, channel strip wise, is Pro Tools. It's laid out like a console. It's emulating that thing. It's now just a tape machine, a digital tape machine, but it's laid out like a console. So if you're an engineer by practice, studied, that's the closest to that brain, versus Ableton is laid out horizontally, very different. You can just keep adding, versus you have limitations in Pro Tools as if it were a console with the amount of inserts that you could, send out. So I think working with, and also listening to the first hour of Rick Rubin on Angie Huberman, I was going to bring up something like this, which I feel like Pro Tools offers in a sense, which is limitations. We've talked about this on a couple of episodes, but Rick dives pretty deep into creating with limitations as being kind of the only way to truly reinforce what something is going to be. Because if you have endless capabilities and possibilities, then you could make anything. And people aren't looking for anything. They're looking for a deliberate creation. And I think that I become more deliberate in Pro Tools. I think Blake Slacken talked about this on his And the Writer Is podcast, which things are harder to do in Pro Tools. So he also produces in Pro Tools because he thinks it's more challenging to create a sound, and then you only would leave the sounds in that took the most effort to make unique in this. Because in Ableton, you can just kind of you can just keep adding these like modulating affects, and you can make something sound like super abstract, which has its benefits. I mean, abstract parts and sound design are interesting, but people like nostalgia. People like a piano. They like a guitar. And I think that Pro Tools makes you capture the thing as is a bit more, and maybe in the mix process maintain the thing as is more. You're less likely to fuck up the sound, I would say, mixing in Pro Tools. And also mixing with, like, my philosophy is very similar to what Rick is talking about, which is we talked about this, about 10 plugins, and it's exactly why he talks about this in the episode on Huberman, because the limitation thing makes you try to solve a problem with the colors that you have decided you're going to use. We're only going to paint with red and green, right? I think that's like the Brian Eno thing about the sound stations. Every project, he has 5 sound stations. It could be a whirly with a pedal board. It could be a 1 drum set, and those sound stations will change for every album that he does. But I think Pro Tools lends you to being more limited, and I like that.
Interesting. That's not the answer I expected you. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting.
That's more of a
maybe we could talk about some of the sort of technical stuff. What you said about Pro Tools being Pro Tools basically made to do a digital replication of a recording studio. It was a console and tape machine, like you said. And so it basically has been built from the ground up to handle audio very well. It's very stable with audio. It can handle a lot of tracks. It can handle a lot of plugins. I've found with Ableton, it just gets less stable the more audio you put in there. Pro Tools has all of the editing features that I think superior to Logic when I've seen people do vocals in Logic, and definitely better than Ableton, even though Ableton has added a sort of a playlist feature. Pro Tools just seems to handle audio better. It is definitely the best DAW for recording, editing, comping vocals, things like that. The nudge features, the options, the editing features are just vastly superior to the other DAWs. I find, interesting to talk about limitations. I think there's something to that. Ableton is a very fast workflow for creating things. The reason I just delivered a mix in Ableton and why I'm doing this one now is because I'm getting stems from the producers who wrote the song. I'm finishing the production and I'm mixing. And so it's such a crazy deadline that I'm having to make production adjustments and mix adjustments at the same time. And I've just been mixing as I go. So the ideal would be something that you and I have talked about, which actually I really got from you, which is once the production is done, bounce everything out of Ableton, bring it into Pro Tools and have sort of a separate mix step. As the producer and the mixer, it's really nice to separate those things. I don't have time to do that now because everything is on such a crazy deadline, and getting stems from other people later has just been challenging. So I'm forced to do it in Ableton, and man, it is challenging to manipulate audio quickly in Ableton without losing quality. And somebody asked in there about quality. We talked about that before.
Steve, I wanted to touch on that.
Audio quality of just putting audio files in, null test, everything equal, it's all the same. It's just basic algorithms. But what Ableton does is it has both, sometimes it defaults to these warp modes, which even if you don't manipulate anything with the warps, it adds a little bit of fidelity changing. And it's just so easy to do that. So all of a sudden somebody's like, oh, we want a tempo change, and you just shift things slightly. Every piece of material, or for the most part, can change fidelity a little bit. Yeah. And that's oftentimes why Ableton will sound different. But man, is the creative workflow so much quicker in Ableton to just make beats and make tracks. But yeah, the audio aspect of it is challenging.
I would say this I would say as a piece of advice, and I wonder if you would notice a difference, because I did a test once many years ago, before I even had this studio, where I think it was above 30% CPU usage. Say you're seeing, because there's the on the top right, I believe, or top left, there's the CPU number. Above 31, my brain started hearing things in the frequency spectrum overall change. The thing that was most noticeable was like the thuddiness in a snare. When like I was making a lot of EDM music, and you intentionally wanted that like that note to the snare drum, and you would tune the note to the key. Like, it was a very intentional thing. And depending on adding more tracks, and one could argue it was there was some masking going on in frequencies as you were adding, maybe like another pad, and like the low mids are there. But I would be having to make moves to compensate for the lack of that. When it hit 31, things started sounding more compressed and more dense. And when you got up to 51%, things just started sounding small. Like, drums I wasn't adding anything arrangement wise. I was just adding plugins or, audio units. And all of a sudden the things were sounding smaller and smaller and smaller and rounder and not as punchy. And I wasn't adding things arrangement wise. This was just like, let's just add a bunch of fucking multi-band compressors to something that's not even on, just to test what was happening. And the sound was degrading. And I came up with this philosophy with my friends. We were doing this test. I'm pretty sure because it's made for stability for a live performance. So sound quality is going to be hurt, so there are no dropouts. Like, Pro Tools will just stop playback because it can't keep up with the buffering of the audio, because they want to maintain the audio quality, versus Ableton is willing to sacrifice quality and fidelity for stability, so their DJs don't crash on a live set, or they're known for their playback running for huge performances and huge artists. Like, that is more important. I would imagine that is what they should be focused on. I've been saying out loud for years now that I think they should make a Ableton Live, like an Ableton Studio. So it is a little bit more functional for stability, and then you would get some dropouts, but the quality wouldn't go down. I think this is a known thing, and people are talking about this.
How long ago was this that you did that?
Before I had the studio, 7 years ago.
There's
8 years ago.
There's options now, both in Pro Tools and Ableton, to I think Pro Tools is like limit pops and clicks in playback, or not adjust for, there's a bunch of like, do you want to sacrifice some quality while you're listening when things get crazy? And I believe both programs have that. I have not noticed the Ableton sound quality go down. There's definitely some
But hold on. But when you so you don't notice a difference when you stem out Pro Tools. When you stem out,
when you bounce things, I don't think there's any rendering difference if it's above 31%. I've not heard any of that. It makes sense when you're playing back that it will. As we said, Pro Tools was the architecture of it. The original program was made as a program to handle audio, to replicate a recording studio in the digital space. Ableton was made for live performance. It's really not called Ableton. It's called Ableton Live. And so that's why it works so well with loops and all that.
Yeah,
so
for that reason.
Ableton will sacrifice quality for stability when you're listening. But when I bounce things out into stems, I don't notice any fidelity difference based on.
When I up until 3 years ago, when the pandemic happened, I was producing a lot more, and I was making beats in Ableton. And when I would export the stems and put them into Pro Tools, I could turn the same stems up that were hitting the red in Ableton in Pro Tools, and it would sound better by a large degree. Like, I'd be clipping Ableton just to get it to sound like something interesting and be able to like get maximum volume out to feel something in the studio. And then those same stems I would put into Pro Tools, and I had like 6 dB more headroom to make it actually sound better. So my gut is that there's something going on in their soft limiting, just like Fruity Loops. Like Fruity Loops has that hard soft limiter built in. That sounds more like a thing to me than, or a more desirable sound and thing than Ableton's. Sounds like it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But there's some sort of saturation built into the soft limiting of the two bus there, that things get smaller and smaller versus Pro Tools.
Bounce options and how it rendered, 32-bit versus 24-bit. How it's handling the audio, that you could make the adjustment in the settings and it would be the same. There's somebody saying they're 32-bit and live. I work in 32-bit in Pro Tools too. I was still noticing it. It's pretty dramatic to my ear on my speakers. 3 to 5 years ago, or whenever you were doing this test 7 years ago, and the other thing too that's tough about the discussion about plugins and programs and converters, like the Apollo stuff, and Apollo sounds bad, but then it turns out they've upgraded all their stuff in the X stuff and it sounds much better. The converters are better. So it's like all of this stuff was constantly getting upgraded and tweaked, and it's hard to know what they're doing. Sort of like when we talk about the like Spotify and the streaming services, like what these companies are doing when they're doing updates, and how they're changing their algorithms. It's kind of hard to know. But I haven't found.
All right, so let's
Ableton that you were talking about, especially like the going above 30% and that sort of thing. It may be the case, but I haven't heard it.
Okay, so I would say that if you're talking about while it's listening, so you're saying that if you export. You're mixing. Let's say you're this song you're talking about. Let's just stay on this song. You're going to deliver it through Ableton. What you export out of Ableton in your mix is going to sound different than what you're listening back to, because you think it'll sound better.
I'm not running into
than how it's playing back.
Issues like my CPU is not going crazy. The M1 flies. Like I'm doing full mixes and it's not. But I imagine if I was maxing out my computer, then it might sound different enough as I was playing it back. But I'm not going crazy with the CPU. Someone said in there too, like Ableton automatically puts fades on drums. Yeah, but you can turn that off. I mean, that's the thing about Ableton. That's
yeah. You have to know it. You have to learn it.
You have to adjust that don't default the same way as Pro Tools does, or Logic, I would imagine. Things like don't automatically put everything on warp, because if you put everything on warp, it will degrade the sound quality. So you have to be careful about that stuff. It's a lot of default stuff. Yeah, exactly what you're saying. People don't know about the default.
That's something I'm wondering in general. That's something I wonder in general about another benefit of Pro Tools, benefit of certain plugins, like Isotope, for example. Isotope starts default 0 on most of their plugins. Yes. Pro Tools starts as a blank slate. I think that's something positive. Logic, also starts defaulted more like Pro Tools. Ableton defaulting with these parameters on is sick for like creative workflow. You drag in a loop and there's a tempo. I want to make a 90 BPM hip hop record today, and you drag in a loop and it stretches the night. That's so sick. Like someone's already writing in 15 seconds to your beat because of that. Like that, we don't want to take that away. We don't want to downplay the importance of what this flow is, but in an audio conversation about final output of a mix, that's what you and I are discussing today. The default should not be there. I'm wondering if there's a benefit in Ableton for you if you're finishing a mix in there, which would be to minimize the amount of audio tracks for flexibility for my perceived sound quality issues. Like if you had 60 tracks or 100 tracks, bringing it down to 24 to 30 tracks, if your mix would sound better after committing and using less resources in the software. My gut says it would.
Getting rid of all the plug-in strain on the computer, so you have minimal CPU. That'd be interesting to try as well. And somebody's saying in there as well, like the earlier Ableton definitely fidelity was very strange, and they sort of continually updated. That's the thing that I think, in these discussions that you and I have, people ask questions about, how much technical knowledge should I have? And the answer is, it depends entirely on what you're doing. But understanding what 32-bit float versus 24 does to your headroom when you're bouncing things, and you want to clip stuff, excuse my burping, when you want to clip things, like clipping digitally, you have more headroom when you have 32-bit float, and how programs work, and how, how these things do or don't degrade sound quality, and what those things mean. I mean, those are, if you're doing a lot of different things and you're trying to work at the highest level, by the way, people watching this, you can tell that even Jon and I aren't 100% sure on what is doing what at all times. It's a challenge, but the value in understanding it as best you can will translate into the quality of what you're doing. It may not translate 95% of the time, but to be honest, as we talk about, that 5% is really what people like Jon and I get continually hired for, because we figure it out and we get it done. And, right now, I got off the phone with one of the A&Rs on this project who's sick this morning, and she's freaking out, and we got this and the timing and the whatever. And I'm here like, I'm excited. I'm getting it done. I'm going to deliver this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I got this. We'll figure it out. Like, that ability to work and get it done when everything is like, that's really the skill set.
Yeah. That is like that is what I learned immensely from working with Rob Bissell on SZA. Man, it was the ending of that was so stressful, and every time he would call to ask for something changed, the day of the release, he would just be like, "Hey man, how's it going?" Like, just so chill the whole time. Even if you imagined him as being frustrated, he showed no visible signs, and that album could not have been made without him. And I was thinking about this today while I was making espresso, because I'm seeing Rob for dinner tomorrow night. Just like how lucky the industry is, how lucky TDE is to have someone like him and his demeanor and his skill level on their team and in our world. We're so lucky to have certain people. There are certain engineers, producers that I feel lucky to know based on way more than their level of talent, just their ability to be relied upon, be kind, be open to, flexibility when you can be, and just getting the job done under any circumstance possible with a smile on your face, like really, really being appreciative. I think he's a gem in our industry, and I'm lucky to know him and call him a friend. I feel the same way about you. You're just down. You're to me, you are the inspiration for flexibility that I strive to have like 5 to 10% of, right? I will achieve maybe 10% of what you've achieved. I think my position where I've positioned myself, this is definitely on me, doesn't allow for much more than that at this point in my career. But I would love to get a little bit of it, and I'm very inspired by you. I'm inspired by Rob. I'm inspired by Tyler. I'm inspired by Raul Volta of OG and Volta. I'm inspired by these people. Having dinner with Raul on Sunday night, the reason why they work so much is because they're there in the 10th inning. They're there when everyone else goes home. That's the thing that keeps and not sourpusses. Just like, what do we got? Oh, you want to do this instead? Cool. Let me make a phone call. Let me tell my wife I'm not going to be home. Let me we'll work this out. Oh, you want this?
I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. The ability to be unstressed at the end of the process is the crazy skill. And that's why when you watch interviews with someone like Rick Rubin, I mean, he tells a story on I don't know, it's Joe Rogan or one of those things about his house burning down, and him waking up and smelling smoke and being like, oh, my wife will take care of it. And then going back to sleep as his house is burning, and then having to climb out just a crazy story, because he's got such an extreme, I've just got this demeanor, and there's something in his brain that's wired a certain way to just kind of be calm through all crisis. And we'll just get it, that energy can translate beautifully into being a record producer. You obviously don't want to die in a house fire, but, I aspire to do I aspire to do everything short
good metaphor
of die in a house fire, to be the person who it gets called at the end of the process because they know I have the skill set and the demeanor to get it done and the track record. And to be honest, that's a big part of why I get called. A lot of people increasingly, and we're trying to help people out. A lot of young record makers can make great sounding stuff. Can you be the person that is there, calm when everybody else is freaking out, get it done at the end? Everything's changing. Like literally this morning, I got stems from 2 different producers. The mix has to be delivered to mastering tomorrow. we're still changing production stuff, adding vocals, adding drums, like everything. And I'm mixing it and doing it all at once. And like, I've done this enough. I know it's going to get done. I've now, you know, it's going to get done. And so when everybody else is freaking out, I'm like, you just totally, we're getting it done. Just make sure I get this and that.
I recently got a phone call that was, oh man, I'm sorry to call you on this tight deadline. And I was like, oh, when do you need it by? Oh, end of next week.
That's
like,
luxury. What are you talking about?
I love that luxury. That's what I'm saying. I actually was like, oh damn, I'll do it today. Like that's what I want. I want like enough of these things to just keep happening. So like the days are just stacked up with things to get done. And then you look forward to whatever your evening plan, if you're doing anything socially in the evening, you look forward to those more as you're busy throughout the day. I think that's like, and you might come back after that too, but there's something about looking forward to a thing because you're juiced during the day with your creative flow process. Like cram it in. I don't know. I'm just happier when I have that level of reliability. And I think that's why I bring up the people I shouted out, because I sense that their best work is done in those circumstances.
Absolutely.
And I'm
the people who can work well in the crisis. Somebody said in the chat there, I live on a different continent. I wish I could shadow these engineers. And then someone commented, go join the Discord. That's really what we're trying to do here. And the Discord, there's now like 14 or 1,500 people. Brass Tracks took people from their Discord and put them on there. By the way, you got to come on there, John, because people are making memes about you and me. And
what does it mean to be on? I actually don't know what it means to be on a Discord.
Is a tech platform that is somewhere between like a subreddit or a series of subreddits, and like Reddit, and then like a WhatsApp group chat. So it's kind of in between the functionality of those. So ours is now, like I said, 14 or 1,500 people, but it's an active community of people who kind of interact through the internet. There's sub channels in there of different interests. There's like a mixing channel, and there's a production channel, and then there's like a books channel, and there's a health channel, and people, it reads kind of like a message board, but it's a little more real time, like group chat. Rory's in there every day, just dropping crazy knowledge. Matt Beckley's in there, Kian's in there. I know Bane's joined. There's a few other people but there's like deep knowledge of some of the people that we've had on. And then there's newbies too. There's a whole newbie question, and people are really positive. I mean, it comes from the ethos of you and I, which is we're just going to share our information. And so this is a place that people they go, hey, has anybody tried this new thing? And people will give each other mix feedback, and people are collaborating, and there's a weekly songwriting thing that's happening there. There's all kinds of stuff, and it's starting to branch out into different interests and different things. What are you butting?
But if you have Rory, but if Rory's there, then nobody needs me.
By the way, fair point, but people would still like to see you. It's not about need. Rory is between Rory and Keith and Matt Beckley, there's basically all the information you can need. But
you're good.
It's a beautiful place for friendship too. It's not just information. I think it's, people could go in there and say, hey, I'm really stressed, and it's a nice little support group. I mean, the thing that you and I are realizing, I think, through a lot of this is, man, there's a lot of great young record makers who don't have access to be in Los Angeles or to be mentored by people. And we're really trying to create a situation where you can have some of that. At some point, by the way, the Discord is going to get too big and too crazy, and Rory and Kian are going to be busy with things. But then even if they go away, there's an amazing community of knowledge there. There's really brilliant people on there, and it's really helpful. And it's on the Live with Matt Rad. If you go to the Live with Matt Rad Instagram, it's in the link is in the bio for people asking there.
Okay. I'm just thinking, like, I can't even keep up with like group threads with friends on what's going on. Once it gets over like 10 messages, I'm like, where do I even?
The Discord has got
who do I respond to?
Go to sleep and then wake up, and there's like, why are there 50 messages on this one topic? And so we're now trying to figure out how to manage.
That's what I'm saying.
There's people who are there all the time, and then there's people who kind of pop in and give some thoughts or ask a question, or it's an interesting spot, and it's evolving too, and it's really community driven. And shout out to Iggy and Bradley and Hendrik, who are the guys that really are helping moderate it in addition to some of the folks I mentioned. It's, people are really friendly
Nice.
too. Basically, I put a little manifesto that's like, be nice, be generous, ask questions, help people. If somebody messes something up, be patient, treat these people like your friends. And it's become a really wonderful place. So people asking about, there's a couple of people asked this week about, does Jon accept resumes for assistants, for interns? And, we've talked about this before. It's just, that's a hard thing to do. I think
I'm sorry, guys.
Things like the Discord, and then make records with your friends and try to come up together. And you can Google it, or you could search on the Live with MattRad Clips channel on YouTube. We've talked about assistants a few times. So I think people should check some of that stuff out. But anyway, there's the Discord spiel. Let's hit a couple of questions before we finish up. There were a couple very mixed specific questions. Yeah. Things that we maybe addressed in the past, but worth kind of thinking about again. I love this question from, I don't know how to say the name, M. Bird, talking about mixed translations. Just like a basic, maybe we could just do a basic thing of how do you get your mixes to translate? Listening on different systems, certain frequency ranges, understanding how different systems, how different playback systems work, what frequency ranges. Maybe just give a couple of thoughts. I'll give some thoughts as well. How do you make mixes translate?
Practice, reps, taste, referencing, using the new tonal balance control plugin from Isotope is really helpful. I've never really... I think we talked about it the last time we were on. It's a new plugin that basically shows in like a tunnel view, basically an average of, I guess they have figured out like some sort of correlation of popular music. And you get presets like bass heavy, like if you're, listening to a hip hop or a trap record or something like that. And it gives you this kind of ever flowing. It's not like an analyzer that you're used to. It's very specific and different to my eyes at this point. So I like this one. This is the first analyzer I could say that I even use. I hate analyzers except for the Pro Q3, but those are for different reasons. Right? It basically shows you where you are, in a general sense in comparison to other records out there. And you could import the curve you can use their Audio Lens plugin now, and you can let them communicate together where you can then the example I was offered up was, I had one of the Isotope developer guys come over to my studio and show me this, where one of my favorite pop music mixes of all time is 24 Karat Magic. So we imported 24 Karat Magic, and then when we were listening to a SZA mix, like how it compared to the overall frequency range, though it's a crazy different style record.
Overall frequency spectrum, but translation, in my mind, is much more about the individual components and things like how do you get an 808, which might sound good on a big bassy system, to also translate on a phone. Also, like the question, somebody followed up the question. They said, it sounds great in my car, but not my mom's car, which I love that. I love that as a question. I mean, so we're talking about like, I think.
But that's what an analyzer will do. You can put the analyzer on, you can solo the 808 and see where it is in comparison to the low end. I mean, I don't know that's much different. The sum of all parts is what creates the translation. You can say individually that one thing I would say that the translation is the 2-track. So that's what we need to be focused on.
What I was going to say is one of the things when people talk about translation is you're talking about how something sounds on imperfect speakers. Basically, you're listening to things that emphasize the mid-range or don't have as much low end or missing lots of high end. And how do you mix to make sure that those things happen? And certainly, like you're talking about, making sure that the sort of overall tonal balance is there. One of the things
that's not what I'm talking about. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm not communicating this properly. The things that you like, because we all aspire to have things that sound like other things that have worked. We're all inspired by different genres from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s onward. So we listen to music and we know what we like that sounds. So if you were to import a curve visually of then you could make those things sound like a certain thing that you like enough where it will translate to multiple devices that you already trust. So this person's mom's car Drake might translate great to both of them. So we would then want to maybe see what that looks like visually. That's a helpful AI technology now, that you can visualize what things are peaking. But Drake's vocal is really loud. So yeah, maybe you like a loud vocal. Maybe you like an 808 that doesn't have an intense kick on top and it's a softer one. We can think about the overall individual elements, but getting a visual representation of what we know we like. So referencing was the version of that before there was a visual thing. You would go to a studio, and you still should do that now. Press play on something that you like is the number one way to get something to translate on whatever speakers you have, because you might not have 14 versions of speakers. We all kind of have a car test, some sort of headphone, and a basic speaker test. I think that's a general. It could be your laptop speakers. It could be anything that you're lucky enough to have, all the way up to a PMC or an ATC or whatever, like high-end example we use. But any speaker that you listen to most of your music on will be your primary reference point. And then you have a secondary reference. For me, that's AirPods, because I think that's where a lot of like those lower harmonics that are going to be missing in those devices, though might sound good in your car or your mom's car. If you don't have the feeling in here, then we're losing. So I like that as a secondary translation point. The phone is important. It shouldn't distort on the phone. If it distorts on the phone, that probably means there's too much low end, or maybe there's like excess rumble that's happening on a sound that you forgot about. Like a lot of my job is to filter sounds that like were sent to me with 20 hertz in the snare drum. It's like, that's never gonna translate to the phone. So why do we use that? Those are where you would consider the individual. But I think when people talk about translation, they're talking about their overall arrangement, which obviously is from the ground up built based on each individual element. If we want an 808 to be the focal point, we might want to mix the 808 loud first and then put the vocal in after it to get that kind of hip-hoppy perspective where the vocals are in the mix and the 808 is the loudest thing. There's maybe some techniques that can be spoken about how to do that, but I don't think that's overall what we'd be touching on.
Yeah, I think those are good thoughts. The other thing I would say is for people who are hearing their mixes translate, when you poorly in certain places, figure out exactly what it is that you're not hearing or you're hearing too much of, and then go back to your main.
Yes.
If you're listening in your mom's car and you're like, man, I can't hear the vocals, or I can't hear the snare drum, or the 808 doesn't sound right, make note of that, then go back to your main monitoring setup and do your A-Bing, do your tonal control visually, and really try to dig into the individual things that you're missing and understand why. That to me is one of the best ways to help understand why something's not translating. I remember having the discussion probably with you and with Baines, the big thing of there's so much in the trap music genre, which is a subset obviously of all the things that are out there, but low end translating is a really interesting thing, figuring out how to get harmonics when they make sense, things like Spectre, or even bigger distorting things like Decapitate, or some of these things that add layers of harmonics in the octave above the fundamental. That's oftentimes what's going to translate on a phone, on a laptop, on smaller speakers. Somebody said there are different sizes of speakers. Yeah, having different references. I think I remember before you got your car, were you using audio movers to stream onto the laptop or something like that? Like all of us.
Yeah, I still do that to my phone.
Multiple systems that we listen on. I even think walking around the room is a good way to understand things. It's having your
big one for me
in between the speakers and your equilateral triangle, and the tweeters are right here, and like that's great and the best place to do most of what you're doing. But then just taking mixes around and being like, man, why am I missing that frequency? Going back and understanding what's happening in your main setup. That's actually the translation to learn. The translation is you understanding what things sound like on other systems, then bringing it back and going, oh, I'm missing that in my own brain. I think that's the other thing to think about. We got a few other questions. We're at about an hour. I got to jump back. Maybe really quick. Somebody always asks every 4 live. Somebody says, "What's your favorite thing for adding top end to vocals?" Like somebody asked a version of that, and to me, it's still Spectre. It's a little harmonic saturator. It's still
Spectre, and I like the Ozone 10
I
vintage
use that
EQ.
sort of overall on my mixes.
Those two are pretty much it.
Because they add
those two.
some little bit of harmonic stuff in addition to just the frequency going up.
We should do our own version of the Pensados Place Batter's Box for a whole hour episode where you should just hit me with questions and like one word answers.
I definitely don't want to
for a whole hour.
But we did do a version of this like a year or two ago where it was all the questions at the time you didn't want to answer because you didn't want to answer the annoying. And then it turns out it was really fun and wonderful.
Yeah, we did do that. Let's do another one of those. I know what you mean. That was actually really fun. It's a good version of that. We should do that.
Like, I don't want to answer any of these questions. Let's just get them all done at once. And then it was a blast. It was super fun.
Yeah. Well, we have more people now following us and listening, so maybe we have to do another version of that with some updated
so
answers.
You're coming on the Discord soon, and
I'll be there tomorrow.
I love it. It's good to see your face. You got to come by the new spot here. It's pretty dialed in. And we're having dinner in a couple of weeks, right? We have it on the next Wednesday. But I'll see you on live Tuesday if we're still doing it again. Good to see you. Love you. Thank you guys all for watching.
Cool. I'll come by the studio maybe during an afternoon or something before that. So.
Thank you guys.
Cool.
Peace.
Bye.